Today we sit down with Dr. Ben Stickle to talk about the scourge of porch pirates out there swiping our packages. Ben is the leading authority on package theft statistics, trends, and research, but he doesn't keep it all academic. Ben also works with companies and organizations to make our deliveries and our packages safer. Plus, he's one of our exclusive SafeWise expert advisors. Ben has shared his expertise far and wide, including at the UN and on Good Morning America, just to name a couple. And you can learn more about his research on his website, benstickle.com, which is linked below. We had such a great time talking with Dr. Ben Stickle that we needed to turn this interview into two parts. So welcome to part one, where you're going to learn all about who porch pirates are, how they operate, and then stay tuned for part two, where we're going to get Dr. Stickle's advice on how to keep those porch pirates away from our packages. Thanks for joining us, and here we go. So Ben, we're so glad to have you here talking with us today about porch pirates, because the big season for package thieves is just around the corner. What got you on the package theft train to begin with?
Well, thank you for having me today. Porch piracy is kind of an unusual topic, per se, for an academic to get involved with, and it's been an interesting journey. My background is actually in policing and private security. I did a little bit of that as well. And so from that, I really took a deep dive into how can I do research that actually matters, something that actually prevents crime, something that helps us, investigate it or at least apprehend those who are involved with it. And I had a student come in my office one day, and their family member had been a victim of package theft. And so we were talking about this, and she happened to be looking for a research topic for her thesis. And we began looking up information. This was early 2018 about package theft, and we could find almost nothing about it other than a lot of very interesting videos. And so I like to tell people I did what any self-respecting criminologist does when they can't find the answer to their question. We watch YouTube videos all day. And so actually the first jump we had into this was selecting, at that point, I think we found 67 videos that were free to view on YouTube that met our criteria. We basically watch those videos and use what's called a crime script analysis. And that's the idea that rather than looking at a crime as a single event, there's ways we can break it up into stages and then look at how we can prevent at each stage. And so we watched a whole bunch of videos trying to find out everything we could about how package thieves operate, what they're stealing, and all those types of things.
We all have packages delivered, especially now more than ever. And so we feel, I think, more vulnerable to this potential crime. And we found out in our state of safety survey on SafeWise this past year, package theft was the number one crime people felt was most likely to actually happen to them. And they're probably not wrong. And speaking of that, it is very hard to find good stats and solid information about how often this is happening and how much recovery happens and things like that. Do you have any maybe numbers that you rely on to kind of give us the scope of how big the issue is?
So thankfully, institutions, organizations like yourself and others have really taken it upon themselves to start doing some surveys on this, because that seems to be the best source of data that we have. And there's a couple reasons for that. The primary one is most, and I can't really find any police departments that actually keep track of this. Some of the surveys that have been done, I guess this isn't encouraging because it's bad news, but there seems to be pretty consistent between about a third and 50% of every study that I've seen, people have been victims of package theft. And if you ask them if they know someone who has, it jumps even higher. So the encouraging part of that is, even though the surveys are done at different times and different methods, some with 500, I did one with about 700 respondents, others have done them with about 2,000. We're finding that 30 to 50% range in most of these reports, which makes me believe that about 30 to 50% of individuals who receive a package at home have had their packages stolen at least once. Property theft is always much more likely to occur to you than many other forms of crime. But to have it at this high level seems extremely high. I doubt many people would say any other item was stolen at that high of a rate if we ask the same question. So I think it's going on very well, and unfortunately, we just don't know how much it's happening at the moment. I like to research what I call opportunity crimes, and I think opportunity is a huge factor. Now, just because it's an opportunity structure doesn't mean it's not a group of people who are working together in concert, very purposefully going out and stealing things. But when there's a package on their front porch, there's an opportunity. And so anytime we have a greater opportunity for theft, it's just more likely to occur. And when you can remove that opportunity, you then lower your chances of actually being the victim. The crisis, the pandemic, the stay-at-home orders, all of this has just taken our home delivery just to a ridiculous level. In some cases, especially during the first wave of the lockdowns, you saw almost triple digits increase in home shipping. And while those numbers have come back down, they've kind of leveled off and they're pretty stable, far beyond where they were 2 years ago. And as we go into the holiday season this year with everyone looking for Christmas gifts and things, and the warnings we're seeing and late in 2021 about supply chain issues and buy early, I think you're going to see a lot of people who are trying to buy to avoid large crowds. They're going to have these things delivered at their home. And so again, the more we have delivered, the greater opportunity, the more likely it'll be that these thefts occur.
But do you find that there's any rhythm or patterns to how porch pirates operate? Is it often a team effect? Because I also see people running, and there's a car waiting and they snatch the thing. Or is there any rhyme or reason, I guess, to how these guys operate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I just want to, before I answer that question, I just want to point out something that's very important that I experienced over and over again as a police officer. Package theft wasn't as big of an issue when I was patrolling the streets, but vehicle break-ins was a huge problem. And it happened a lot in residential neighborhoods. And what I found was I could try as a police officer to be there, but until a bunch of neighbors got really upset and took turns, and they were like, I don't recognize that vehicle at 4 a.m. and calling, it was really hard to prevent. So the idea that you have neighbors joining together through that app or others who are sharing information is really helpful, more than you probably realize for law enforcement to really solve this. Now, as to whether people work together and how they work, again, the first study we did, looking at these videos, and that's the only data that I'm aware of that really looks at how these people operate. I'll start with saying that the study is a little bit biased because we had 67 videos, and if it wasn't captured on video, then it wasn't included, right, in the study. And so, you can't necessarily take this study and say, well, they all work this way. But you did point out some things that we found in our study. One is that there tended to be some people who worked together. When they were working together, there was usually somebody who was a getaway driver, if you want to call them that, who drove the car. And we were surprised that they would just back into the driveway sometimes, and somebody would get out and walk up and just take the package. And what we were really surprised was it didn't seem to matter if there was a potential victim's vehicle at home. Generally, we think most criminals don't want to get caught. Very true, obviously. And so we would think they would be risk adverse, as in if it looks like there's someone at home, maybe they won't come around. But that didn't seem to impact the ones that we saw. Something else we picked up on that we just mentioned in our first paper, it didn't make the data because it was such a rare event, but we did notice a few times when people had what we call dummy boxes. And we just kind of coined that term because they'd walk up with what we perceive as an empty box and set it on the porch, or sometimes they'd keep it and walk off. Now, it could be like you described, that maybe that's a package from next door and we didn't have that video to find out. We kind of concluded that might have been an effort to be a ruse. So if you go up to a door and someone says, what are you doing here? You could just say, well, I'm leaving this box, and walk away. And especially with the increase where you have Uber and other delivery services that are delivering without a uniform, it's entirely believable to think that just some random person is walking up to leave a box at your front doorstep. In fact, you yourself, let's say you came out when someone walked up and they were intending to steal your package, but said, no, this is for you, and left. You might not think anything about it till they were, all the way down the street. So there's some very creative ways to do this. We also saw in this early video something that didn't make sense to us at first. We saw quite a few thieves who were driving U-Haul vehicles, whether it was a pickup truck or a box truck. We thought this was pretty strange. But what I noticed about a year and a half later, when it came Christmas time in my neighborhood, that several delivery service providers were contracting So there was a delivery person in a uniform, but they were driving a U-Haul truck because they were out of trucks. And so they'd go to the U-Haul, they'd rent one for the day, they'd fill it with boxes and they'd deliver it. So then it made me, even more curious is, are these efforts to, again, have some type of ruse, say, look, I'm legitimate, or are they in fact the contractors who deliver from one house and steal from another? Again, the research we did was limited and couldn't say, but there's definitely an element of random people who do this, walking home and take it, and there's an element of organized crime that does this as well.
Is this because of job loss and unemployment because of the pandemic? People are resorting to things they wouldn't have done before, and they're stealing packages. And I'm like, I can't say that I know that is a thing that's happening. What insights do you have?
So when we did our video analysis, we tried to look for some characteristics. And again, it's not a controlled study. I can't say this is true everywhere. And to some degree, we had to guess. And so, we asked the question, is this male, female type thing? And again, we're, 3 different researchers who would try to come to a decision based on a video. But we found it to be an almost even split men versus women as the thieves, which is unusual, even in a retail theft environment, which this is kind of similar, but that seemed unusual. The ages was generally younger. Now we tried to have age categories, and we eventually backed up to under 45 and over 45, just trying to make it work. But the other thing that we looked at was we took a guess at socioeconomic status, and we basically did a low to mid or high. And obviously this is to some degree biased, although we did have 3 independent reviewers who looked at all this, but it was fairly obvious to us if someone looked like they were struggling, as in maybe they were homeless or something like that. But the majority of people we saw seemed to have name brand purses, Gucci sunglasses, driving BMWs. So it was really intriguing to us that there seemed to be a good portion of people who, at least based on their clothing and their appearance that day, seemed to be decently in that socioeconomic status. Now, could they have lost their job last week? I guess, and they're still, wearing their fancy hats. But it was interesting to me. Generally, I'll just say we don't see a huge connection between unemployment and crime. And that's something that researchers have looked at for decades and have not found many studies that really support that. So there is some relationship to, I'm down on my luck, I need to steal something. I would find that unusual in this category, and here's the reason why. You think, okay, I'm out of a job, I need some income, but I need food. So you might see an increase in shoplifting. But with porch piracy, and one of the things that makes it so intriguing is, you could steal a box of athletic socks, or you could get an iPad. And there's a lot of effort
you don't
involved.
know what you're getting.
Pretty wide payout. And so I would think that the majority of these people are not just down on their luck, unemployed, can't get a job. I don't think that's really what's driving this.
Have you been able to detect any kind of trends, like does size matter? Like are smaller or bigger packages more likely to be stolen?
I have limited data to really back this up, as I've said with everything I've said so far. I think that if you, purchased a 52-inch television or something and it was on your front porch in a box that made it clear that's what it is, I think, you'd have a higher likelihood of having your TV stolen. But I don't know that it's necessarily the bigger the item, the better. We did see a couple of videos of very large items that people had a hard time getting inside of a car. And so that's, if the thief is thinking, they'll go, I don't know that I can fit that in my trunk. And we saw some pretty comical videos of people trying to do that. So there comes a point when maybe too large is too large. Where I think size is really important is, again, going back to that opportunity, do people see it from the roadway? So a couple things we found are really important is how close a house is to the area of travel. And so anything that was 25 feet and further from the roadway seemed to have a reduced chance of being a victim of package theft. And we think that has largely to do with the fact that you just don't see it as well from the roadway. And so as you change the package size, that changes as well. So if you have a very small or a thick envelope with a small item that's laying flat on the porch and you're 25 feet away, chances are, especially if you're driving, a thief isn't going to see that. So again, the opportunity there is reduced, as opposed to a larger box. So to some degree, I think size will be more important for a visual awareness of whether there's something there to take, not necessarily, oh, bigger means more expensive. And in fact, if anything, I think the way our society is trending, that smaller typically means sometimes more expensive.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say.
Is there any difference between like rural neighborhoods, apartment complexes, just a regular, suburban cul-de-sac? Is there any noticeable anything there?
Yeah, well, there's a lot in that question. So I mentioned that some of these surveys that have been done have been pretty consistent between 30 and 50% been a victim. Where they've not been consistent is where this has happened. So I've seen some reports that say it's happening more in rural areas, and I've seen other reports saying it's happening more in urban areas. From a criminology perspective, what we know about other crimes, leading into what I do know about package theft, it would make more sense for it to be happening in urban environments where the homes are closer together and generally closer to the roadway. As you pointed out, it makes it easier for the thief to walk up and go to each house. There's more opportunity. And you can see, again, the package from the roadway. If I lived in a farmhouse, even 500 feet off the roadway, the idea that I'm going to see that from the roadway or just be there is low. And so I think that kind of lowers the likelihood. Now, you can amplify this significantly when you start talking about apartment complexes, and that's a really sticky question. Ultimately, we have not designed homes or apartment complexes for package delivery. And I've really tried to lead some thought on this. I wrote a piece recently called The Last Foot. And I'm basically saying that we need to kind of rethink the front porch and what happens when a package gets to its intended address. Because, if you think about maybe older homes, maybe some people watching this have had older homes, maybe you have a coal chute, right? Where the coal truck would come and dump the coal in your basement, especially in the northern climates. We don't use those anymore. Many people may have grown up and they had a milk chute, right? A little special box, and the milkman would come put the milk in your house. And even, again, same idea, a mail slot on your front door. So all these things have been evolutions of home design. And where we're at now is the critical need to rethink the front porch, right? What happens to that last foot, that time and space when we deliver a package before it's retrieved? Even beyond theft, if you don't have some type of overhang over your house, which many of the modern style of houses don't, then your package is sitting there in the elements and is, could get wet, etc. So we've really not done a good job designing houses currently for the current need. And as I mentioned, apartments are really hard. So if you have a very old apartment, this was never even thought of as a complaint or an issue. And so we had little mailboxes in the hallway, and that was simply enough. You got your paper mail, your envelopes, and you went upstairs to your apartment. And now with all this volume of packages coming, it's just overwhelmed. There's no place to do it. Maybe they deliver to a common area that's unlocked, so anyone can walk in there and try and buzz up to the floor. And some apartments, and I've read about this in New York City and others, who were built with a package reception area in mind, had a very small area, and they're just inundated by the volume of packages. So they're still sitting in the lobby, even though they have a place for this. So, this is a long-term problem that we really need to think about. That includes structural design. How do we design a house and an apartment building to, receive these items and then distribute them correctly? So it's a real problem. It's going to take a long time to determine.
Thanks again to Dr. Ben Stickle for sitting down with us to help us get a handle on what porch pirates are up to and how we can steer clear of them. You can get more info from him on his website, which is linked below. And we've also got more videos right here about how to thwart porch pirates and what to do if you actually do end up getting one of your packages swiped. You can also read the specifics on how to make a claim with different delivery carriers in our full guide on Safewise.com. And just to make sure you never miss a new video or an awesome safety chat like this one, be sure that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Until next time, keep those packages out of sight and stay safe.